it means we have to break them apart. And the way to do that is with water in our bodies. If I had a beaker of water and I put in a teaspoon of salt, and if I just let it sit, eventually what would happen? Victoria? It dissolves. The same principle applies in our body. This is my salt crystal. We're looking at it again as sodium to chlorine. And because somebody had to give up an electron, somebody had to accept an electron, we see sodiums carry a positive charge, chlorines carry a negative charge. You take that salt crystal, drop it in water, because water has negative and positive. If there's the positive charge, well, do you remember how the oxygen portion of water had a negative charge? Negative combines to the or attracts to the positive. Chlorine is negative, so the positive connects to the chlorine, and we have now broken the salt apart. I have now given my body ions. I'm going to go back to the example given a little bit earlier this morning. When someone is sick, and I don't know, let's say they've been throwing up a whole lot, maybe they've had diarrhea, all these things, they've been really, really sick. And if we have ever had that happen, okay, we know that we usually tend to try to replenish our bodies, all right? And we tend to replenish our bodies usually by maybe drinking, like some people actually drink the Pedialyte. Pedialyte is good for babies because if babies are sick, it helps give them back those electrolytes that they have lost, okay? And some of us may use like the Gatorade, Powerade, stuff like that. And we're using that because it contains these pluses and minuses. And they're already dissolved in the water. So when we drink those, the body's ready to use them. Does that make sense? So the body will then take those pluses and those minuses to the cells that need them, especially nerve and muscle. When somebody does a heavy sport, okay, like if they play football or basketball or hockey or whatever the case might be, where they're doing something extremely physical, what do you normally see them drink after or during that activity?
Water, Gatorade.
You usually see them with the Gatorade, Powerade, these electrolyte drinks. It's not good to drink them all the time, though. Have you ever known somebody who usually drinks them every day or something like that? Okay, that's not good unless they're like an Olympic athlete. Okay, they're an Olympic athlete. Yeah, go for it. Okay, otherwise it's not really that good to drink them every day. But our goal, all right, is to get those ions available in our body.
So my cousin, after a workout, he actually drinks like chocolate milk. Is that kind of the same as like Gatorade? It might just be weird. I don't know.
Well, that would be, you'd be getting some protein and you'd be getting some glucoses. Okay? And in the case, that's actually not a bad thing. Okay? Because unless you are really doing a very heavy physical activity, okay, where you've been sweating like 3 or 4 hours for that workout, you don't really need to have that electrolyte drink. Okay, so if he's just kind of doing his workout, doing his thing, that sort of thing, yeah, he's probably wanting to use that protein to build up the muscle, okay, and glucoses to replace the energy that he used. Yeah. So, yeah, that's probably a cool way to get some of the stuff he needs. Yeah. So, the reason for having these ions, we're going to learn in the plasma membrane of the cell is where they're going to become important. So if these ions are available in the blood moves to the cells, we've got them available for the cells. The breaking apart of the ions is, you usually hear it referred to as dissociation, the breaking apart of those compounds. Because we are breaking apart a salt, okay, that's why we end up getting the positive and the negative charges, which we know as our electrolytes.
Like, when it's in water, is that just because the body doesn't have to work as hard to digest it? It's already like broken down.
It's already there and readily available. Yeah. So in the case of the body being depleted of it, that's why those drinks can be beneficial. But if the body's not depleted of it, it can actually become harmful. Okay? And you'll learn why as we move into our nervous system and the muscular system. You'll learn why having too much or actually having too little both can be detrimental to the body. So, the forces that exist, the way that we usually say or talk about those forces is that the covalent is usually the strongest, ion second, hydrogen last. But in reality, hydrogen's the very strong bond. Well, we've already mentioned that when we break it apart and we get pluses or minuses, we have now created electrolytes. Anything, and electrolytes, now, this is kind of important for us to remember right here. They conduct electricity. Now, does that mean we are electrical in our bodies? Yes, we are. Ever had a EKG? Well, I think now they call them ECGs. They were measuring the electricity of the heart. If you've ever had a myogram, they're measuring the electricity of the muscle. Our nerves are electrical. It's really cool. Everything else is a non-electrolyte. Glucose, for example. We'll learn glucose is the smallest molecule a cell can use. It is the only molecule nerve tissue can use. It can't use, nerve tissue cannot use anything for energy except glucose. So a glucose is a non-electrolyte. It doesn't break apart. It stays C6H12O6. Okay? And when it gets to the cell can break it apart and use it for energy. When these activities occur, whether inside or outside the body, we have chemical reactions that are taking place. And in a chemical reaction, anything that moves into the reaction is called the reactant. The product is what comes out. So in the case of, say, the glucose molecule, C6H12O6 goes in. By the time we're done, we've actually produced energy and CO2, which we actually breathe out. When we talk about the bonds, the terms that are going to be used, the chemical bonds that get made is called synthesis. Whenever you synthesize something, you make it. So in the anatomy and physiology, the biology field, when you make a bond, anabolism has occurred. If you break a bond, those materials have decomposed and catabolism has occurred. Where have you heard the term metabolism?
As far as like how much you eat.
That term, metabolism. You might hear somebody say, "Oh, I have a fast metabolism. I have a slow metabolism." Is that really true? Yes. People can have very high metabolic rates. People can have slow metabolic rates. And yes, those rates can be affected in the body by certain things you may eat or do. In our bodies, the human body, the sum of all chemical reactions is metabolism. So the definition of metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions in our bodies. Whether that is building a molecule, anabolism, or breaking something down, catabolism. So when people say metabolism, what is it? It is the sum of all chemical reactions in your body. And that can actually be tested. They can actually measure that.
So I have a question. So if somebody is trying to lose weight, some people lose weight really quickly, and then some, they say, oh, it's from metabolism. Some that have a hard time losing weight. What does that mean? What does that have to do with that?
It's actually a very true statement. Okay. Now, people who can lose the weight rather quickly, they may not have any other underlying conditions that are present, and because they are taking steps
to affect